Hello everyone, I am Tejal Khandelwal, a PSIR and GS Paper 2 faculty. In today's video, I will give you a detailed analysis of international relations and how it should be studied for the prelims and the mains. And we will understand what are the common mistakes students do, what is the trend analysis of the kind of questions that are coming for both prelims and mains, what are the aspects that should be covered for both prelims and mains, and what is our approach of coverage of international relations. So let's start. If we have to understand the subject orientation of IR, I would say it is interdisciplinary in character because we study a lot of determinant factors like history, like geographical and geostrategic locations, the economy and the economic structure, the social structure, and yes, obviously, the politics of relations among states, non-state actors, and international institutions. In IR as a subject is a narrative. It is not only about events, summit, treaties, conventions, but whose story makes a stronger impact. And when we study IR for the civil services examination, we should always be guided by a debatable approach, which means what should be the basis of these debates? The basis or the thesis, I would say, of these debates should be first the understanding of what is the government's official policy towards any issue. What is the government's official stand towards the issue? This should form the basis of your understanding. And you should also know what is the official policy stance on the other side of the particular debate that we will be talking of. And then, since you are going to be a future civil servant, it is very important that you synthesize your understanding with a balance in this approach. Which means you should know the government's agenda, you should know the government's stand, you should know what are the challenges and what are the opposite arguments about the same, and then a very key synthesis about the same with a visionary outlook. You must understand that foreign policy is a long-term vision. So it is not something which changes very abruptly. It is guided by both continuity and change. Even if sometimes the narrative says that there is a complete change, but reading between the lines means to what extent you understand what still remains as a matter of continuity and what has truly and substantially changed. When we talk about the common mistakes that students do with respect to international relations is that they need to understand for preliminary the most important core is mapping. Without having a clarity of the broader picture as well as the micro aspects of continents, key strategic locations, places in news, countries in news, you cannot study IR for prelims. Obviously also for the mains, but with more and greater emphasis for the prelims. Because the kind of questions that come in prelims from the Project Sumit pipeline to the BCIM corridor, to the INSTC route, to the East-West corridor, all these questions, or we look at the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, all these questions are guided somewhere from the understanding of your mapping. So mapping has to be a very core component for preparation for prelims, and obviously also it will help you in mains. The second important thing is conventions and treaties. Now, even though students do study conventions and treaties, they only study it more in the form of a content, but rather than understanding what is the politics that is going behind it, which means whether these conventions or treaties, to what extent they are voluntary in nature, how much part of that convention and treaty is legally binding, what is not legally binding, to what extent it has been fulfilled by nations. And when we talk about summits that are happening, conferences that are happening, meetings that are happening of various groupings from the G20 to G7 to ASEAN to SCO. We need to understand that we don't only look at summit as an event. A summit is something that is always under process, which means what has been discussed at the summit, what has been the achievement and the outcome of the summit, what is something that is still going under negotiation, what is the stand of the developed countries, what is the stand of the developing countries, which country is opposing what, for what reason, as well as what remains as an incomplete agenda. Now, in the prelims, the questions are not only on the outcomes of what the summit is talking of, but what was not done at the summit, or the critical issues also are something that are under highlight in your questions. So, this has to be covered in a more nuanced manner now. When we talk of poor consolidation of facts, so we all would have studied where is the BRICS summit happening. We all would have studied the BIMSTEC summit. But if we talk of facts, we need to very much with clarity know what has been the theme of the summit, which summit has this been in the year 2025 and the year 2026, which means whatever summits are happening before your preliminary of the key groupings, as well as a lot of facts which you would have studied across for your mains but are consolidated one place so that they remain very clear in your memory before the prelims. And these are the common mistakes. Students don't cover these parts in this manner. And that's where, despite the high percentage of marks that is there for international relations, they are not able to score very well. Now, when we talk about the mains, what is it that we need to understand about the mains? So, there is something called as core, something called as periphery in every topic. When we talk about core, we mean what is the importance of a particular issue within a bilateral relation. We need to understand what is the periphery, which means something which is not important, which is not directly going to be asked. For example, when we look at India-China issue, there is higher probability that the economics of the relations and the border dispute might come. But there is meager possibility that the question of Tibet or Taiwan will come directly in India-China questions for GSIR. So you need to differentiate things between what should be core and what should be periphery. If we understand Afghanistan, we might have so many aspects to coverage of the theme of Afghanistan and India relations. But we need to understand what is the issue of the recognition of Taliban at the international level. What is the stand of different countries? How is today India looking at Taliban? How its official policy stands? So this should be the core of the coverage of the topic. And rest everything is periphery, which means you should know about it, but the emphasis will be less. Why? Because we can expect the highest number of questions from what is the evolving nature of India-Afghanistan relations with the advent of Taliban and the exit of USA. Fine. Now, when we talk about international relations, the second mistake that students do, that they read too much about IR without knowing its key application, which means they study everything under the sun. Because IR is very interesting, it just keeps you so engaged. You want to read multiple authors, you want to read diverse books, and you feel like an intellectual. But from the examination point of view, when you read an article, when you read an author's perspective, you need to understand, is this the narrative that I will be applying in my exam? Is this the debate that should be put forth when I write answers? So reading too much of content about something without knowing what is the key essence that you need to focus on, what is the key arguments which you will make as a civil services aspirant in the exam is very vital. So that's where reading in between lines becomes very important, and reading too much content is not the key, but knowing the key application of what you are studying makes the true impact. Now, second, the other thing is students read questions unidirectionally, which means if the question is given, they do not understand what is the narrative behind this question. For example, I'll tell you, when we say reading in between the questions, there is a question which came in 2024, in 2024, which was reading between the question asked in 2019. The question says, what introduces friction into the ties between India and the US that Washington is still unable to find for India a position in its global strategy? which would satisfy India's national self-esteem and ambition. Which means this question is saying till date, America has not been able to find the rightful place for India in its strategy. So, do you think the comprehensive nature, the comprehensive global strategic partnership we share today has just come out of the blue? Which means, is there not strong and closer bond that is there between USA despite the friction that is there? No. So you have to answer the question in this particular narrative that yes, there has been problems, there have been challenges which have been there since independence. But today, after 1990, the larger focus is how there is more closeness in the relations because of whatever factors, be it the systemic factors or be it the domestic factors that have come into place in India, right? So this is the narrative that you need to understand. One more question I will tell. When we say that students do not read between the lines and they lack debatable approach, both aspects. The long sustained image of India, it's a question in 2019. The long sustained image of India as a leader of the oppressed and marginalized nation has disappeared on account of its newfound role in the emerging global order. Which means since India today is sitting with the major powers, it has emerged itself as a key power. And now the issue of the developing countries and the global south or NAM holds less relevance for India. Do you think that? No, because this is a narrative that is spread by Western scholars and commentators. India is trying to act as a bridge between the West and the global south. That is how G20 comes into picture. That is how Mahasagar comes into picture. That is how all the focus that we are doing with respect to UNSC reforms comes into picture. So India has not forgotten the key stronger relation that it has with these countries despite the new rule. Now, this debatable approach should come, and that comes only when you understand between the lines, when you understand what is the debate revolving India's position, India's changing position, despite what is the continuity that continues in the foreign policy, right? So in mains, these are something that needs to be addressed. Reading between the lines, understanding how much to study what. So you don't need to do a Tibetan issue in like so much depth, how much you need to understand the border issue or the economics or the strategic competition that is happening between India and China. Understood? So these four key problems need to be addressed. Only then your approach towards mains IR questions will become nuanced. The next problem is students do not focus on keywords, and this keywords is something that is every subject has its language. So when you study geography or economics, you use those terms. IR also has some ideological terms, some generic terms which should come in your answers. Without writing or without understanding these basic things, you will not be writing good answers. For example, you will use the concept of collective security very loosely, but it has a specific meaning and it is opposed to the concept of balance of power. We cannot say both are similar things. Even though both are seeking to establish peace, but they are seeking to establish peace through different means. One is a liberal approach of doing things and one is a realist approach. So some basic theories, some basic lens of looking at IR should come. And that does not come in your current affairs magazines, because there is a lot of silos approach that goes behind current affairs magazine. They will only cover an event, an outcome of an event, but they will never cover this nuanced understanding of what is this ideological tilt. How is maybe a BOP different from collective security? So the usage of terms will also be different. Is this understood? So keywords, key concepts, key visions of foreign policy is all something that will come only when an expert is guiding you. All right. Now, global issues of IR. If we look at the last 4-year questions of IR, there is this year globalization in 2025 mains that has been asked. Before that, terrorism was asked. Clean energy has been asked, right? The oceans, the sea has been asked. International Maritime Organization's role have, which means key issues of international relations are also becoming one important question. And we need to understand the debates of these issues. You have to understand what is the debate between nationalism and globalization to write good examples, to create that great thread, golden thread in your answer, and to create a narrative when you are writing. Otherwise, you will be writing unidirectionally only. Next is students do not innovate in answer writing in the mains. They do not do maps. They do not use facts correctly. They do not know which part of the question we should highlight more, which part of the question we should highlight less. What should be the statements that should be used? What should be the key lines? What should be the key terms? If all this is missing in your answers, then certainly the 50 marks which are really easy to win in paper 2 is lost. Fine, so these are common mistakes students make in the mains. Now let's do the syllabus analysis for both prelims as well as the mains. We will read the direct mentioned syllabus and the indirect mentioned syllabus and the deconstruction of the syllabus as well. Okay, when we talk of directly what has been mentioned with respect to IR, they are saying current events of national and international importance, which means whatever are events that are happening with respect to international issues, they are something that will come in your examination. Second is geography of India and the world. When we talk of geography of the world, effectively geography of the world refers to all those places which have been in news, which means they do not ask any questions of world just like that. They are always going to be places which have been news, be it the conflicts in Sudan, in Chad, in Latin America, Venezuela crisis, be it crisis in Brazil, be it crisis in West Asia, some seas, some key strategic locations. Yes, these are things that are going to be asked with respect to world. So we see in 2 years that there have been so many countries in news. In one question, there have been 5 countries and 5 key sites that have been asked. So geography of the world refers to those countries, those issues which are of international importance. However, when we look at sustainable development, environmental ecology, biodiversity and climate change, we will not be looking at them from the perspective of environment. We will look at them from the perspective of politics. What is the politics that is happening? What is the competition that is happening? What is the resource conflict around issues? So we will not be taking it up more from concepts like maybe, what are endangered species or what are, heat, global warming or global cooling, but we will be looking at more of them of what are the divides, what are the conflicts, what are the stands, what are the funding mechanisms that have been created to address these issues. Okay, that is with respect to how you should cover for preliminary. When we talk about mains, what is the direct syllabus? The direct syllabus says India and its neighborhood, bilateral, regional, global grouping, the agreements which involve India or the agreements which affect India's interest, effect of policies. See, understand this, politics of developed as well as developing countries is mentioned separately here. We'll decode this. Indian diaspora and important international institution, agency, structure and mandate. This is the direct syllabus that has been mentioned for mains. But what is it that has to be prepared for the mains becomes important, which means for mains, the deconstruction of the syllabus is effectively this. That's how you will synchronize your subject. First and most important theme is the foreign policy. Without understanding foreign policy as a concept, the determinants of foreign policy, you will never get the broad picture. And then what has been the evolution of policy, it will ease all these part of the syllabus very much for you. Once you understand what has been the vision from Prime Minister Nehru to Prime Minister Modi, what is the continuity and the change in the policy. So foreign policy will also give you a broader vision of how India seeks to look at things. What is the larger vision that India seeks to achieve on various issues, be it on the ocean, be it on over the continents, be it with respect to ideology, with respect to history, ancient culture, British time, right? Be it India's social structure and relation of foreign policy. So that is why foreign policies understanding becomes vital, and it will help you also a lot even in the interview. Now, second aspect is India and neighborhood. How should neighborhood be viewed? So one is the immediate neighborhood, which means the South Asia and all the relations. And we also in immediate neighborhood, even though Myanmar is not part of South Asia, but yes, it is because we share borders with it. We also include Myanmar in the immediate neighborhood. Next is the extended neighborhood, which consists of West Asia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia. And this concept of extended neighborhood evolves in 2001 in the Ministry of External Affairs annual report. So it comes very late, but then we will also see how the foreign policy orientations have changed only after 1990s towards this extended neighborhood region. Now, then the next part that we study is the major powers, which means the developed countries here, which means who are these? US, China, Russia and Japan. But as I have deconstructed the questions that have come with respect to developed countries and major powers, I have realized there are certain formats in which questions are asked. And they are the strategic triangles, which means what are these? How are the relation among these three players? What is the impact of the bilateral relationship on the third partner, or how the third partner is influencing these two bilateral partners? Which means the strategic triangle of Russia, India, China. What is the challenge? What is US, India, Russia, USA, Russia, China, and obviously USA, India, China. The most studied is the major power, US, Russia, and China. You see any of the questions on the major powers, I can assure to you questions are around these strategic triangles only. Okay, which means whether the question is on how the threat of China to USA is more deeply embedded than that was there with respect to Russia or the Soviet Union. This question is again this triangle only, US, Russia and China. If the United Nations question also that has come, East-West and the Russia-China alliances versus the West, which means the Europe and the America. So you see questions will be revolving around this. Then questions will be revolving around what are the strategic rivalries and competitions, which means be it at the regional levels or be it at the global levels. Yes, key policies and impact on India. So major powers have to be covered in this nuanced manner. You are not only studying, some 5-10 statements of some USA. You see the deeply embedded nature of the government to government relation, how they have evolved. So whatever may be the political rhetoric of Donald Trump, but India, US have a very differential nature of relationship, which will not be disturbed by some political rhetoric of a politician. It may be in transition or getting impacted like that, but the larger structure remains constant. Is this clear? Fine. Next is developing countries. So the questions that came on NAM and global order, the question on global south, and the question on Africa has come. So Africa has appeared 3 times in your main since 2013. And we see that Africa is not mentioned in the syllabus, but it comes from this developing country. So these 4 topics, Latin America has never been asked, but since this year there have been many visits by MEA, we can expect sometime a question that will emerge from Latin America. Then obviously a clearly mentioned is Indian diaspora. So we analyze diaspora broadly across the regions, across the Americas, across the Europe, across West Asia, across Africa. Yes, and Australia. These different regions, what are challenges, what are the problems, what are the strengths, how they have grown in political salience and economic salience, right? That is how we will cover diaspora. Indo-Pacific region is a very important category, which means when we talk of what is Pacific, which means peaceful. So Indo-Pacific region, when we say Pacific, it should be a region of peace. But today, it is a geostrategic category guided by the highest amount of geostrategic competition and rivalry. And that's why, because all countries' foreign policies are revolving around this Indo-Pacific region. Clear? Now, international institutions, UN, WTO, IMF, World Bank. Questions are not so, questions are becoming difficult for students because when they study, they do not give this part focus, which is the most doable part. Why? Because it is static. Once you understand these topics in detail, never you will have challenge in writing the question. But you always ignore them and just do it at the surface level. It is important that they should be studied at depth so that a very good score can come from these parts. Then we have obviously regional groupings also, like SEO has been asked twice. Then we have ASEAN, we will study Quad, other things also. And also one important thing that I cover in my classes is global issues. Okay, so we will take up some key global issues and we will understand what has been India's position towards this issue, how India negotiates an international level on these issues. Okay, this is your mains syllabus effectively. Now, when we talk of trend analysis with respect to marks, so prelims weightage, if you look at 2020, there have been 2 questions. If you look at 2025, there have been 12 questions, which means 24 marks. And if you see from 2022 until 2025, questions have always been above 20 marks, right? Which means it is very important that IR has to be prepared very specifically when we talk about the prelims as well. Fine. Then when we talk about mains, it has been a constant 50 marks, huge application across essay, across security. Security questions are also associated with IR. And which means, yes, specifically you have to study security, but there is a lot of overlap. You can use these examples in ethics also. You can use these examples in essays also. Okay. So that's how things will help. Now, let me tell to you what are the trend analysis with respect to the types of question, and we will give some examples for the same. So, for example, when we say facts-based question, which means very simple questions, which means you should know only some information. Like what are the objectives and aims of SEO? Simple question. It is a facts-based question. When we say knowledge-based question, it is a little more higher, which means it will also include facts and it will also talk about the understanding of a particular theme. So when we say some knowledge-based issue along with facts, I can talk about the Indo-Pakistan question that had come, which says to what extent soft power can be useful for improving relations that have been marred by terrorism in India, Pakistan. So now when the question asks to what extent, which means your understanding of to what extent soft power is good and what are the limitations will also come. Next is the interpretation based. These questions are very difficult because they are debatable questions. They are narrative based questions. They are not very direct. You have to do deconstruction of these questions. You have to read between lines. For example, if the question is talking of energy security, right, as the main pillar of India's foreign policy towards West Asia, right? So any student will think this is only a facts-based question because we had to largely talk about what are the India's energy security interests there and how many countries like UAE and others are helping India to develop strategic petroleum reserves in India's certain parts. Right? Or how with Qatar things are important, or how with Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran things are important with respect to energy security. But does India's policy only revolve around? So the question is prospects of foreign policy was the second part of the question. So you had to say yes, energy security is one component, but there are other pillars also to India's approach towards West Asia. Now this will be, so question look sometimes like fact based, but they are interpretation based. When you look at the major power developed questions, developed countries question, they are largely interpretation based questions, which means there will always be debates in them. There will be a narrative in them which needs to be understood. Read between the lines has to come. And overlap, which means all three will be there. There will be facts, knowledge, as well as interpretation. So all these three things will also be there when we talk about, which means for example, the question on Japan that came in 2019, it was a very good example of an overlap type. Why? Because you had to write about facts, you had to have understanding of relations at all levels as well as interpretation, because the question says the time has come for India and Japan to come closer, and their closeness will have impact. Their economic closeness, their strategic political closeness will have impact on Asia as well as the world. So imagine you will have to divide the question first on where they are coming close, factors that are bringing them close, and the impact of them coming close for peace in Asia as well as the world. So it is a very overlap type of question. Is this clear? So types of question, when we read, some questions will be fact based, and now that has gone, that era has gone. This will always be mixed with knowledge and interpretation. Clear? And then advanced level question. So the United Nations question is a overlap question. You will have to give instances also of Russia-China alliances example, right, at the UN. Clear? Now, what are the aspects that has to be prepared for the preliminary? Now, so I have brought in some dimensions on which questions have been asked, and this is how you should focus and divide your preparation, which we will do in the prelims classes, which means you study the international institutions, you study the members. Like for example, now Timor-Leste has become the 11th member of ASEAN. A very probable question that will come. Maybe it will not be asked who is the 11th member of ASEAN, but the mapping of Timor-Leste can become important. Is this clear? Right? The Fiji's Prime Minister has visited India. So in this question, in this context also, Fiji and the mapping of Pacific will become important. So yes, international institutions, when we talk about regional institutions, summits, reports you will be covering in economy also, but here we will be doing it more differently. International years are being asked. So one question was in 2016, last year there was one question. So that makes it obvious you have to study. Projects are very important. Every connectivity project and its mapping becomes vital, because this is something very clearly, if you don't understand, you will not be able to answer, which means mapping is vital. Exercises that you will do, we will have only 2 pages, all exercise clubbed at one place. Countries and news, whatever crises are happening in the world at one place. Yes, international conventions and treaties, the essential nature of this, which is the binding part, which is the non-binding part. Yes, all of that will come. Right? So with respect to now the shipping agreement, also with respect to IMO that has happened just in November, these kind of things also become vital. Other organizations in terms of IMO, initiatives and programs of the UN or any other agency that we are talking, international prizes, but not all, just few. Operations abroad, there are nearly 12 to 14 operations that we have done since the Modi regime, only those we will study, and books, some key books that are there. So this is how prelims has to be prepared, not beyond this. But all of this has to be clubbed at one place. Only then elimination will be helpful. You know what to pick. Sab kuch nahi padhna hai. At that time, the memory has to be short term. Little things, but consolidated at one place. Now, how you should study for mains. What are the aspects that should be covered? The first is the present status of relations, which means what is the key Minister of External Affairs, Prime Minister, Presidents talking about each other's relation. How Donald Trump looks at India, how Prime Minister Modi looks at USA, like this. Those key statements will come. Then the introduction of the relation, okay, which is a general introduction that we are talking of. Then significance, geopolitical, geostrategic, geopolitical, which means power-based and policy-based, strategic, which means security-based, economic, which means trade, investment, natural resources, infrastructure, energy security, all this. That is significance. This is one prototype format you should follow. Drivers of relation at all level. What is the bilateral closeness? Why they come close, or what are the friction at regional level and what are at global? So major powers should also be understood like this. Crucial relations, drivers will become very vital. Okay. Areas of cooperation, political, economic. So in economic, we will also do it at across various parameters: trade, investment, services, infra, energy, natural resource, nuclear, defense, maritime, cultural, and science and technology. Then what are the issues, concerns, conflicts, divergences, challenges and issues, steps ahead, and conclusion. This should be your main way of conducting or understanding a relation. And this is your prelims. Only this much. In these aspects, things need to be covered. Now, so when we talk about how we will approach the subject, number of classes for foundation will be for 50 hours. Crash course, if we do, we will do it for 24 hours. Rapid revision for main is 10 hours. And rapid revision for prelims is for 10 hours. Okay. We will give you 2 tests, and all the PYQs that every student writes in my class, I will myself evaluate it and give you feedback. So along with classes, if you write all the PYQs, I can assure you your mains IR is solidified and consolidated. You will get the thought process within my class. I'm not giving you information, knowledge, and only information and knowledge. I am here to provoke you to think in a debatable manner, to get the correct crisp of the narrative. Okay? Yes. Then with respect to resource material, handouts for foundation batches, we also give a crash course revision notes. Even we give this for all the foundation students so that they can revise only that much during the mains time when they have less time. And integrated, all our handouts are integrated with facts, statement diagrams, current developments, PYQ and practice questions. All right. So if we have to talk of any reference book apart from class notes and handouts, which are the base, value addition, you can refer to ORF articles. But for example, I will cover something like so much detail of India, China, US, Japan. So don't read the same defense agreements in ORF. If you think something that has not been covered in the month after your batch till your prelims or mains, only then you should cover. So don't go more in depth. Do more horizontal coverage with these references. Okay. Newspaper analysis, obviously, because IR is something you'll have to update also. Larger things, not petty things. India and world and why Bharat matters. These two are the government's narrative because he is the present MEA. So this becomes relevant in which sense, but you should do it only in your free time. Once your entire syllabus for prelims is covered. So do it either on a weekend when you are a little bored, in your free time, just 1 hour read this book. Clear? This is how. So yes, the time for the great leap forward has come. And yes, you must now beat your human spirit. You must prepare for the year, for months, for weeks, for days, and for hours. And when you beat this, I'm sure the civil services examination journey will become super exciting. All right, so all the very best. And you can drop in all your comments, doubts about international relations. I will surely address them. Thank you so much. All the best.